I'm studying bioinformatics, so I'm going to talk about bioinformatics and social sciences because somehow these two meet. So just a bit of background, bioinformatics is essentially computational biology. And what you're doing is you're taking all these biological systems that you have and you're trying to sometimes analyze data. So that's the computational part. And sometimes you're trying to simulate them computationally because obviously in nature things take longer, you have less control, but you can simulate. So the kind of bioinformatics that I'm a part of is structural bioinformatics. So what we do is we can take, say, a protein, an enzyme, and simulate it. Sorry. Not COVID. I guess that's what I would say it was. Anyway, so what we would do is we take a protein and an enzyme. An enzyme essentially is part catalyzes a reaction in the body. So enzymes take part in how you process drugs, they take part in just like everyday reactions in the body, just for your body to function properly. Okay. Your enzymes need to be doing, some enzyme needs to be doing something. So sometimes even if say an example of drug discovery, you could take an enzyme that's important to responding to a drug for certain disease and find other drugs and try to simulate that interaction computationally. And that can inform you if the drug is good, how you can improve the drug, how can you improve this one. Like by obviously you have to then validate it in the lab again, but also that takes that saves a lot of time in the process. So what we do is we do the simulations of the proteins, enzymes, whatever you want to call them. It even could be DNA. And then what we do is then what you want to do is analyze what is happening within the protein itself. What each little subunit or each little residue inside the protein, each little segment of the protein, how it's reacting. How is it reacting when this drug is there? How is it reacting when the drug isn't there? How is it reacting if we change this like this? Because it helps you develop a better system. It helps you know what's happening. It helps you know why something is going wrong if something is going wrong. And one of the ways we analyze this is through network analysis. And this is a method that has been borrowed from social sciences, from social network analysis. And an example of network analysis would be, this thing that they talk about, like 6 degrees of separation, where there might be 6 people between me and Sizwe. Like a connection of 6 people between me and knowing Sizwe. This is like a social sciences concept. I don't know if anyone is in social sciences, maybe they can expand on that. And how we apply that is sometimes, let's say we're all residues sitting in this chain. Sometimes something that the rat has done will trickle down to Fuzzy, and maybe Fuzzy is the residue interacting with the drug. And somehow, something that Latch has done affects how you interact with the drug. And for that reason, we don't get the desired reaction. And what we do with this network analysis is we try to find those residues that are important to the network. So maybe in this case, it would be Skumbuzo, because he's right in the middle between you. And he's the one who's getting the information from both of you the fastest. So he is the most important residue in the chain. And we try to calculate these metrics and figure out, Skumbuzo is important. So if something happens in the residue that is Skumbuzo, it's going to trickle down and have like downstream effects. And that would be like a centrality calculation. Or sometimes it could be like the calculations are slightly different. It's also sometimes like a game of broken telephone. I don't know if you know broken telephone. So if the interaction between the two of us is not good, whatever happens downstream has been, and in that case, I become important to communication. because of how I've disrupted the network. And applying this network analysis that's used in social sciences to bioinformatics. It informs the work that we do, and I guess loosely the protein and all the rest of the protein would be a gathering, and then we have some of these important centrality residues within the network, within the gathering, that are affecting how things are moving and how information is flowing, and how anything that's happening to these central residues affects the function. And I've just found that really interesting, that social sciences and just a protein can come together, and it gives you a concept that helps you analyze things.
My name is Camilla Mpiti, and I'm a drama postgrad student, and I'll be speaking about what it means to gather in the sense of the third space theory. I think Homi Baba and Soja are very they write very well about it. So if you ever want to read up on them, Homi J. Baba is kind of like the founding father of the third space theory. So like when I thought about what does it mean to gather this, like I think when we were speaking earlier when Sam was still here and we were just discussing, I think we were asking Lifang about witchcraft in China, and we're just discussing, that's really what I'm going to be touching on, like the essence of gathering, but what it means as a type of resistance and a type of rewriting history, right? So I'm going to read a bit because I did prepare. So the bare meaning of gathering is coming together as people just to be and just to exist, right? So an image of gathering would look something like a big open space that is consumed by heterogeneous communities. This physical space where different cultures meet and have necessary conversations about past traumas, about belonging and coexistence can be considered as an act of creating a site for possibility and multiplicity. So you see, when we gather, we come together, black and white, Xhosa and Zulu, old and young, and we come together to exist and resist any hegemonies that tie us to binary oppositions. Unknowingly, we gather. When we gather, we challenge the status quo that is passed on by history that states that certain spaces and certain people are incompatible in one single real space. So we defy that when we come together. I mean, look around in this room, people of different nationalities, people of different genders, people of different, we all come from different parts of life, right? And without gathering, without coming together, we would never be able to come together to share information, to exchange, to discuss issues that have happened in the past, and to actually find a way forward to move together. We exist as either or. So I'm in my own space, I'm in my own space. But however, when we come together, not to say that what we are made of and the things that separate us go away or they're suspended, but we come together to investigate if there's not a dead space that can exist with the coming together of us. So what is a neutral space that houses diversity? It could be a cinema, a theater space, a bar, a coffee shop, a club. Like, how many times do you step into a salon with the intent of doing your hair and leaving, but you end up engaged in small chat about current affairs with a stranger who might be a foreign national, for instance? As you conversate with this stranger, you've escaped the either or binary opposite and you explore the both and also. You stop the process of othering, but rather interrogate your shared existence and discover what is your meeting point with the other person. So surely a gathering is something that's transformative. It's something that allows us to envision something else. It allows for new forms of being to exist. Soja states that the third space consciousness is the precondition to building a community of resistance to all forms of hegemonic power that's shredding off the traumas of the past. So Soja tracks it back to colonialism, about how I think it's Edward Said who writes on how the West views the Orient, and how they don't give them a voice and they narrate for them and they other them. So now we don't want to do unto others as they have done unto you. So we don't want to take it back and write badly about the West, but we actually want to come together with the West and actually say that we share this space. How do we connect? I don't know if you guys may know him. Akram Khan, he's a very well-renowned dancer. He's from Bangladesh, but he grew up mainly in Europe. And he was dancing with, I forgot his name. He was dancing with this other guy. That guy's mainly Bangladesh. And then, he's Bangladesh but moved to Europe. And as they were dancing, they come from different parts of the world. But as they share the space, they discuss the same issues. I think in an interview, he was sharing about how he was in a bus and the person next to him was dead, but he didn't know because the person was sleeping, about that experience, and he couldn't say anything because he was traveling and he had no other way to get there, and he was just trying to get into the US, like into a safe space, and the person that was dancing with him shared a similar experience of being on a, where do trains go? Railway? Yeah. He was on a railway, but it wasn't a dead person, but he also had some contestation with some of the railway people, the ones that take your ticket, and they discuss those things. And, when you don't gather with someone, when you don't mix with them, when you don't come together to share a sense of commonness, that's when you never get to do that, And after that conversation, they created a work. And that work has allowed us to, have a conversation, discuss the third space, pinpoint similarities, pinpoint points of departure, pinpoint points of conversations that we, as even I as a South African, when I watched that work, there's parts of me that resonated with it. They played with the concept of being alive and being dead, and you hear about that all the time in South Africa. And as an African, you always told stories about death and stories about being alive. And given the fact that two people from the US and they come from Bangladesh and they just presented it to me, I was able to engage with that. And that happens in the theater space. That I could watch that in a cinema. It could be discussed at a bar, at a coffee shop. So for me, gathering is resistance. It's a resistance saying, me, I want to learn. And you can't stop that. And I don't want to learn textbook. I want to engage with people. I want to meet someone random on the street, or I want to meet someone random at a coffee shop and start a conversation and go away with something and knowing that there's commonness that exists within us. And that can only happen through a gathering. Thank you.
Thank you.
Guys, as you already know, my name is Saneve Kanjingana. I want to share a bit of this idea of gathering in the sense of ideas. So I have interest in the ideas around rule and power in the deeper East African time, in the Southeast African region. So by using the concept using the deeper histories, is not to fall into the trap of using the pre-colonial or the colonial spatial divide, but to use that, the deeper histories to kind of speak to the histories of before the colonial encounter, during the colonial encounter, spatial boundary. So the time period that I'm looking at the 1824 to about 1924. So we're looking about 100 years of gathering of ideas. But I'm specifically interested in looking at how the ideas about, there's the one concept that captures this idea of rule and in the Xhosa speaking community, umbuso. So this idea of umbuso. I'm interested in how the so-called early, they're known as black intellectual, but I'm using the concept amabhala osiba, ukubhala. Conceptually, it is to see things before, and it has implications into maybe you are an expert in the thing, can give testimony to that. We bhalile loo nto leyo, so you will be called ibhala. And then usiba, it was a concept that was used to refer to those people who write the histories, because the histories and the way they were recorded, it was through the spoken. So the concept of now using usiba would be from insimba, the feather, which you used to record. Literally, it was the feather that was used at the time. So it is the people who are now interested and get into this different world of the writing, recording through writing. So they give testimonies, so they give accounts, so they even dream. So I'm interested in not only just the histories, but to understand their contemporary grappling of the power of the time's rule, and also how they were dreaming about what kind of umbuso that they want to have. So I'm looking at the testimonies of these black, Amupala, Osiba, during that time. So what is interesting to me is that, and for me, I'm not interested in the issues of who's got a particular ideology. I'm not interested in ideological questions. I'm not interested in the questions of objectivity, but I'm interested in how then the conditions of producing those testimonies. Who did they produce those testimonies with? Who was in company? What are the things that influenced those ideas? So where do those who record come from? And who are they recording with? And what are their possible contributions in what then we see as a written testimony into what this idea comes from? So I'm interested in that kind of network of different, the different network that comes into producing these testimonies. And maybe just before I sit down, I have there's two interesting, or maybe there's one guy who's got who remains a mystery. His name is William Gekale Kanye, who writes testimonies about, who gives account to the commissioner, colonial commissioner at the time in the British Kaffraria. It was called British Kaffraria, this what we call now the Eastern Cape, under the time of the colonial governor Grey. And so these accounts that William Gekale are found in the Grey archive, and how he comes in the archive. He comes in as a native interpreter. And when you go and you want to find out who William Gekale is, how does he go and collect all of this information? Who does he collect this information from? And also, who does he write this history with? These are the kinds of things that are silences in the history. There's nothing about Gekale except for Gekale, the native interpreter, and that's all that it is. So for me, it is always, when I'm dealing with this history, it is also to use Sadie Hartman would call the critical calculation, into thinking into maybe where this guy is coming from and how can I fill in the silences. You fill in the silences using what was happening at the time, conjectures, and also maybe use my own imagination, and maybe wonder and ask all of these questions as I'm writing, because that history is full of these foreclosures that we're not able to gather fully how the ideas that we consume today were produced and the processes that they've gone through. So the process of recording, the processing of, of being able to get this testimony that were then subsequently used and translated and used by other researchers to be the kind of the objective information that we need today. So yeah, I'll stop there.